Hi, my name is Kolesinskas, and today we're going to talk about identifying soil compaction. I'm a land use and conservation specialist working with Yukon Extension, and today we're going to talk a little bit about soil compaction. Soil compaction is a legitimate soil health issue, so we're going to talk about ways what soil compaction is, ways to identify it in the field that I think are easy, that anybody can learn, and then talk a little bit about how it forms and also how we can prevent and also correct problems with soil compaction. So what is soil compaction? Soil compaction is basically the destruction of the soil structure. So soil structure is the way that the particles of soil are held together. You know, when you put your hand in a nice topsoil or compost, that it has like little chunks of soil that are held together by what we would call soil glues that have been developed from the organic matter and the biological activity and the physical and chemical properties going on in the soil creates those little chunks you see. That's the soil structure. So soil compaction, you're actually destroying that soil structure, or you're compressing those chunks of soil together and forcing out the pore space, the voids that are in the soil. And those are really important for how air and water move through the soil, how biological organisms move through the soil, and particularly how roots can penetrate and move through the soil. I actually have a diagram here that shows what happens with soil compaction. Is that, again, if you think of a soil being about 50% mineral and organic material, and then the other 50% of a chunk of soil is really voids of airspace. So with compaction, you're actually forcing the air out of the soil. You're making those voids much smaller, a much smaller percentage. So thus, it's harder for water to move in and out of the soil, air to move in and out of the soil, and particularly for roots to penetrate the soil. So let's take a look at a natural soil profile here, and I'll pull out some pieces of the soil and we'll take a look and see what the structure looks like and see if we see any compaction. So when I talk about soil structure, as I said, those are the pieces of the way that our soils are chunked together, and typically in a natural, well-managed soil, here in Connecticut, we expect our topsoil layers to be kind of this granular or even a crumb structure, and we would expect our subsoil, which is the layer below, to be blocky, typically subangular blocky, a bigger chunk with some angles on it. And then in a landscape like this, with depth, we may see some platiness, which is one of those things we would look for compaction if you see platiness up here in the topsoil layer or in the subsoil layer. So let me dig out a few spots here and bring it forward for you to take a look at. So for one thing, that there is, which you have very good root distribution. So that's one of the things you'd look for to see whether or not there's soil compaction, is if you were to dig a hole down to, probably don't need to dig it any deeper than 24 inches. If you see good root distribution all the way down through, it's unlikely that you're going to have compaction. So let me dig out a little piece of this. So you can see here is our topsoil layer, or plow layer as people call it. You can see you've got really good root distribution. There's no evidence that they're stopped by anything. They're not forming any weird right angles to it. As I said, we've got this kind of structure. When you just loosen it up a little bit, this looks like a little like cookie or cake crumbs. And that's, again, these little pieces of how they're put together by the glues that are in the soil from all the biological activity and the organic matter over the years. And then when you squeeze them a little bit, so that's the structure. And then when we squeeze the soil, how much pressure does it take to destroy that kind of PED? And if it doesn't take much like that, we would call that friable or very friable consistent. So structure is the way it's put together. Consistence is how much effort does it take to disrupt the ped or rupture the ped. And then also you see there's earthworms in here, so there's biological activity. So you've got, you know, your macropores, your larger pores, and a lot of micropores. And so this is a nice, loose, friable to almost very friable topsoil layer. No evidence of compaction here. So let's go just a little bit deeper. So that's, you know, a typical surface layer, topsoil layer in Connecticut, which is the depth that someone was historically had plowed, because at one point in time this was all in forest. So plowing it created this homogeneous layer down to about 8 or 9 inches. So let's look at the subsoil and see if we see any compaction. So here's a chunk of our subsoil, and you can see the pieces are bigger. So that's what we would call subangular blocky structure. Pretty typical, and our soils are relatively young geologically, only 17,000 years ago. You can see we have roots that are kind of going through some of this and along the sides of some of these peds. It's kind of a medium subangular blocky. As far as the consistence, how much pressure does it take to rupture a ped? You know, you don't really have to squeeze very hard and you can break it up. So you've got, you know, good pore space in there between the particles. Also, this is something sometimes soil scientists will use is a little hand loop to look at the pores in the soils and the root distribution as well. But that's certainly not necessary for you. So you can feel it feels nice and loose. It's not really hard. There's roots that have moved down through it. You can crumble it fairly easily. So again, I would say that's still pretty friable, this upper part of the subsoil. The other thing you'll notice is when you dig down into the soil, how easily does it dig? You know, here, I'm not really having any trouble digging here until I get to this layer right here. You hear that, how it sounds different than this? So something's going on here. So what is that? So let's take a chunk of that, take a look at it. And again, you can see that it looks quite different than what we saw before. So again, we're in the lower part of the soil profile, but we no longer have that, either that granular structure or the subangular blocky structure. We have what is a platy structure. So as I hold this up and take a look at it, you can see that it's kind of breaking apart into plates, and they're very compacted. So we talked about, so this would be platy structure, and as far as the consistence of how hard it is, or the rupture, how easy it is to rupture the structure, it really takes quite a bit of effort. And then when you do pop it, it's like brittle, it almost explodes. So, and it's quite what we would say for platiness, quite strong. So it takes quite a bit of effort, and this is a moist soil as well. So you can also see, yes, there are a few larger voids where some earthworms have penetrated it. You see very few roots. Here's a root here, but it's actually stopped on top of this very firm, dense layer. So this compaction that you're seeing here, this is compaction, but this is geologic compaction. Okay, so right now we're on our way down Horse Barn Hill, and as I'm looking, we've got a travel path here. Obviously, it's a little bit of a farm road and a footpath, and you can see that obviously the vegetation looks different. It's worn down. It hasn't rebounded with the recent rains that we've had, so it's a combination of things. So obviously the soil's disturbed, but it certainly feels different underfoot, and that's one of those things. As far as identifying soil compaction, I want you to use all your senses. So just walking over the land back there in the surrounding area, this hayfield, it feels nice and and kind of soft and fluffy underfoot. And it's not just because it has more vegetation. You can actually feel it, that it's softer. And then here it's quite hard. So if you're walking on something and the soil is moist, obviously when things are dry, everything feels hard. But when the soils are moist and it feels hard underfoot, you might want to suspect that there could be compaction. Again, when we dig into it, let's see if we see that nice structure that we saw before. So we don't have that nice crumb-like structure that we had before. It's a little chunkier, and then also you can see it's almost got some decent root growth there. You've got below that area, we've got a little bit of an area right in here where it's a little bit platy and a little bit firmer. So we do have some evidence of compaction here. See how that kind of looks like a little bit of platiness there, and the roots kind of stop right there on the lower part of it there. So grass like this is pretty forgiving as far as compaction, not like a little root from a newly planted vegetable. And you can see it's got a little more resistance trying to break up the clod. So we do have some compaction right here, but obviously they've done a pretty good job of staying within this area and just compacting this area. If you are not consistent about your travel patterns, you could very easily compact a larger area that will impact crop growth, and in this field, regrowth of hay, the hay crop. So here we are in the community garden, and you can see this particular plot. There's a few things left in here, but mostly it's been cleaned up for the fall. There is not a cover crop on it, and though one of the things that I do see that I do like is that they do have raised beds, which are nice because of course the soil is going to warm up a little bit faster, and also that because these are again those dense till soils which can tend to be wet in the spring, it also elevates it a little bit and dries out a little bit faster, warms and dries faster. So I think that's a good technique and reason why to do a raised bed for vegetable production. And also you can see right in front of me that they have a very defined travel path here. So rather than stepping all over the garden and compacting the soil, they're reducing their compaction to the specific areas between their raised beds. So let's just take a quick poke in here and see what we see with our spade and our spade hole, as well as with our flag. So again, I can only get in a couple of inches here because obviously this has been compacted with foot traffic during the growing season and using the garden. And then when, in this raised bed area, I have no trouble poking down through into the soil. So I'm not feeling any compaction here. I am feeling firmness and compaction here. So let's just get a little bit of the soil and see what it looks like. So it feels quite moist, and you can see that we don't have that good kind of crumb structure here. There's an earthworm there, but it does have a little, you're getting some of that platiness, and it just feels dense. So you don't have as, and then as we try to look at the amount of resistance to the consistency of the soil, how much effort does it take to break a clod? It does take a little bit of effort to break these clods up. It almost pops. It almost explodes in your hand. And that's because of the compaction. Even though it's a nice moist soil, there's a few large holes in here from earthworms because looks like maybe they put some mulch down or something in here, but it is compacted. And I would expect that but obviously you wouldn't want to have compaction here in your planting bed. And you can see here, just breaking it up a little bit, but how we have some nice structure there. And again, with either with the spade or with the flag, we didn't really feel any resistance to it. So in conclusion, compaction is a real soil health issue and part of managing soil health and risk management, so you don't have yield reduction, so you don't end up having disease problems, that you don't have nutrient deficiencies, because it certainly can impact yields and plant health. Best thing you can do is to stay off the soil when wet, reduce your tillage practices, keep your organic matter levels up, and check for compaction when the soil is moist. Obviously, when it's really dry, that is not the best time to check for soil compaction because everything is going to feel hard. But when the soil is moist, use a combination of a spade and then a wire flag, something like that. Poke down if you feel resistance. That could indicate that you have compaction. So hopefully you have a better understanding of some of the features to look for compaction. Thank you.